Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I'm here to help you finish your Christmas shopping list and let everyone else over there stiff-arm their competition while trying to fight off that tryptophan on Turkey Night. Now, what we did was we partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get up to 75% off over 30,000 autographed sports collectibles during this holiday season. They have something for everyone. But how is RSA able to offer such great deals on JSA authentication, you ask? Well, they do this by making deals directly with athletes so there are no extra markups, and they choose to then pass that savings on to you, the customer. Now, all orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and a money-back guarantee. But hurry up because customers are so stark raving mad for RSA that memorabilia sells out daily. All you have to do is head over to shoprsa.com/SHN. Again, that's shoprsa.com/SHN. So don't wait to bring home your favorites and own a piece of sports history for you and the loved ones on your shopping list this holiday season. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
The Rose Bowl. The game that inspired the college football bowl season has a long and storied history. The stadium itself is 100 years old, and in celebration of it, Pigskin Dispatch is assembling some of the top historians and authors to share the memories, people, and events that make the granddaddy of them all the special game that it is. Enjoy this Rose Bowl memory from pigskindispatch.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history. We are right in the middle of Rose Bowl month and having a great time doing it, telling the history of the stadium that was built 100 years ago. This year, 2023 game will be the 100th anniversary of it. And as we've been doing all month long, we've been bringing in guest historians and authors that know a lot about the game. And, each one has his own topic. And we have another great topic today. A guest we've had on just about a couple months ago, Dick Friedman. Welcome back to the Pigpen.
Well, thank you very much, Darren. It's great to be back.
Dick, we really appreciate you coming back on again. A couple months ago, you talked about the school that you write for, and you wrote a book on Coach Percy Houghton. Just a spectacular book. And maybe before we get going here, maybe you could remind us of the title of that book and where folks can get it.
Sure. The title is "The Coach Who Strangled the Bulldog: How Harvard's Percy Houghton Beat Yale and Reinvented Football." And it's published by Rowman and Littlefield, and it's available on Amazon. And hey, everybody should buy it. What can I tell you? No, really, it was a lot of fun to do. It deals with Percy Houghton, who in from 1908 to 1916 compiled a magnificent record at Harvard, including a 33-game unbeaten streak. And is kind of a forgotten figure today, partly, as I say in the book, because he was coaching before the days of the newsreels. If he had been coaching in the 20s, we probably would all know a lot more about him. But anyway, I found him a fascinating figure. I called him the first modern football coach. And, I found some amazing stuff about him, including a book he wrote 100 years ago this year called Football and How to Watch It. And it's available on Google Books for free. And anybody who wants to read it, I think, will be amazed at how well it holds up 100 years later. The one area, of course, that it doesn't really go into as much as we would go into it today is in the passing game. because the passing game was not nearly as developed. But in terms of so much, especially in terms of deception, motion offense, even offensive and defensive formations, it really, you can really have it in front of you and really not lose that much if you're sitting in front of your television set reading it in terms of how you're watching football. So anyway, I recommend it to anybody, football fans who might be interested.
Wow, that is definitely one that I'm going to be looking up here in the next couple of days to get my hands on. That sounds very intriguing indeed, to see what Coach Houghton was thinking 100 years ago, especially with your recommendation on it. Well, we have you on today to talk about the Rose Bowl, and it really ties in with your expertise because the subject matter that you chose to talk to us about today involves Harvard. Where Coach Houghton spent a lot of his time shortly after that 1916 period, but not too far off. So we are really anxious to hear what you have to say about that Rose Bowl.
You're right. Percy finished at Harvard in 1916. Actually, after that, he became a part owner of the Boston Braves baseball team. He was a baseball fanatic. Anyway, that's a story for another day. And then after the 2 years after that were World War I, in which college games were, for the most part, canceled or became kind of informal. And so really, 1919 was the first season that everybody was back. And Harvard did not have Percy Houghton as a coach anymore. They had a new coach named Bob Fisher, who had been one of Percy's stars in the early part of the decade, had been a star tackle. And Harvard then embarked on a rather undemanding schedule, I would say, for the regular season. They played a lot of games that I think were a little more than glorified scrimmages. But kind of that was by design, because they wanted to keep guys in shape and uninjured for the so-called championship games against Princeton and Yale in the latter part of the regular season. Sure enough, when they played Princeton, which before the Rose Bowl was their only road game of the whole season, it ended up a 10-10 tie, a very, very rugged game. And so a lot of people said at that point that Harvard had knocked itself out of national championship consideration. Back then, essentially, very few teams were really national championship contenders in a given year. And, it was Harvard, Yale, Princeton, a few other teams, Michigan maybe, got Minnesota, but the Eastern teams got a lot of weight because of the press, the New York press, the Boston press, the Philadelphia press. Anyway, Harvard tied Princeton. Then they played Yale, and their traditional rival, and that was a very tough game also. And Harvard managed to win 10-3 when a Yale receiver dropped a pass that could have been a touchdown. Anyway, we've seen that before, and they had already seen that themselves because Harvard and Yale started like in 1875. So anyway, that ended the regular season for Harvard. And in a normal season and in every other season that Harvard has played football, 147 of them, that was the end of football for the season. However, the Rose Bowl, which I'm sure as your other authors are talking about, was then kind of in its infancy, was looking to really increase its imprint. They had already had Brown and Penn out there playing. These schools, the big Eastern schools, were supposed to bring great prestige to the Rose Bowl, Tournament of Roses parade. And so they had approached Harvard before. Harvard had always said no. And the reason given was that the team could not get back to Cambridge before classes started for the second semester. Well, this particular year, which would be the end of 1919 and the beginning of 1920, The schedule was tweaked, and the Rose Bowl came at him again, and this time Harvard accepted. And there was yet another reason for it, and that was that Harvard, as Harvard often does, was undergoing a large fundraising campaign, a national fundraising campaign. So they figured that this would be a way to show the brand, not only in California, but also in the train stops along the way. When they took the train out from Boston to California, and it would be a great way to advertise the brand and raise some money. So this time they accepted. It was considered a great get for the Tournament of Roses committee to have this ultra prestigious university, the oldest in the United States, to appear in the Rose Bowl. And that's why the Harvard team got on the train at South Station in Boston and took a 6-day train ride out to California to get ready for the game.
Wow, 6 days. Wow, I can't even imagine. I hate being in a car for like 3 or 4 hours, let alone being on a train for that long. Oh, that's
well. I will say, somebody who likes trains. Back in the day, trains were not what they are now, which are kind of bare bones transportation. Their trains had a little bit of luxury and class to them back then. I'm not sure that the Harvard guys, traveled first class, but still, you could get up, you could stretch. There was a dining car. You could play cards with your buddies, do whatever you want, and so it was a little different. I'm not saying it was an easy ride. It probably wasn't, and you're right. I mean, they're probably by the third or fourth day, and you're out in the middle of Nebraska somewhere. You probably are not happy. But even so, again, it's not like what the trains are today. You couldn't do it today. It'd be very difficult today. So anyway, that's what they did, and they showed up, and of course, as you mentioned, the actual Rose Bowl stadium was not in existence at that point. This was 2 years before the actual Rose Bowl stadium that we know. And so while this I think was the sixth game that was Rose Bowl game that was played, and they got a big crowd, but nothing like they get once the Rose Bowl stadium was built.
Okay. Now, did they have like stops along the way that they could take the opportunity to do some prep work for the game, like run a practice, or, just keep your physical prowess about you, just run around a little bit? Or
yeah. Once they did have stops, once they didn't get out and do a practice, I believe, till it was somewhere like Wyoming, right? I mean, it was a long way before they got out and ran a practice. After that, they did semi-regular practices. And then once they got to California, they were able to do their regular practice. These were young, fit guys. Several of them had been in the war, had been in the military, and so they had come back to school, and their class. A lot of them were officially like in the class of 1919, which had already graduated. So these guys were actually graduating after the rest of their class did. Kind of like what's happening today with the COVID stuff, where guys, got extra eligibility because of the illnesses. But this was the case where these guys had been in the Army or the Navy, depending, and came back, and so they were kind of hardened veterans, and so kind of were used to this kind of hurry up and wait style of travel and training.
Okay. Now, do you have any of the names of some of the more recognizable players that were more prominent players that played in that team?
The most recognizable would be a player named Eddie Casey, who is in the College Football Hall of Fame. He was their best player. He was a back, and as was the custom back then, he went both ways. Another guy, kind of his running mate, was a guy named Arnold Horween, Horween, from Chicago. and he was also another back. Those were their two best players by
So
far.
is he one of the famous Horween brothers that played for the Chicago Cardinals?
Yes, he is.
Okay,
He is.
okay.
And they are they were a part of a big Chicago recruiting pipeline that they had even back then, right? I mean, they had pipelines, and so those were, I would say, those were their two best players. A guy who figured in was a sub named Freddie Church, and as we'll find out, Freddie Church figured into the game, and often happens in not only with Harvard but other schools. A little used sub comes in and makes a big play, right, to a crucial play, and that's kind of what happened. And they had a good strong line, but no superstars, I would say, even for them. They had rolled over a bunch of teams that kind of were not in their class. But Eddie Casey and Horween, I'd say, were your two well-known names that I would say football historians or people who followed that era would know. Both also ended up coaching Harvard after Fisher. Casey was right after Fisher, and then Horween was right after Casey. So that's the way it was done back then, and to a degree is done today.
All right, so they're out in California now and getting ready for the game. Who's going to be their opponent for this Rose Bowl contest?
Their opponent is Oregon. The Ducks had played, I guess, a somewhat typical West Coast schedule. And they were a good team. They had already beaten Penn when Penn came out in the Rose Bowl a couple of years earlier. So they were considered to be the strongest team on the West Coast, or at least the one that the Tournament of Roses wanted to invite. And with things being a lot less formal and codified than they are today. But I think it was interesting because it was a little hard to tell when I read exactly which team was the favorite. Harvard was kind of the favorite because they were considered the national champion. But Oregon was from a growing football region, and had played a tougher schedule. So I think if you really look at it, even from a vantage point of 102 years, you might wonder, how Harvard could stay with them. It's certainly, if they played today, it would be a different story. Harvard and Oregon. I personally would love to see it, but I'm just kidding around now, as Harvard has been an Ivy League team for 60 plus years now. But so it was an interesting matchup. I think that's probably the best way to put it, and it turned out to be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, I think those are always sort of the ones that are unknown. You look at like how the World Series used to be set up, where there was no interleague play, and you had these
Right.
Two great teams playing all year. They never faced each other. They played a little bit different style. Everybody was sort of on the edge of their seat. How's this going to match up when they these come in contact with each other? And I think that's the same way probably Western football and Eastern football was back in that era. Because you really weren't connected with communication and television and everything that we have today. People were sort of still growing the game and developing the game. But then when you have these two powers, from thousands of miles away playing once a year, it had to be very interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah, there certainly was a nice air of mystery about it. And there even was an air of mystery in the game, I would say, up till maybe 20 or 25 years ago, because the Big Ten and the Pac, whatever it was then, Pac-8, Pac-10, Pac-12, didn't really play. They didn't play each other very much. Certainly, they didn't play that many common opponents. In this case, they had no common opponents, and so you could really build this game up as the mythical, the battle of the effete East against the rugged West. And I think there was a little bit of that. For that matter, I think also that was yet another reason that the Roses Committee, wanted them, because they would get all sorts of publicity all over the country. That it was Harvard. It was an unknown matchup with a lot of excitement building because of that. So now the other thing is, I mentioned a little earlier that there were no newsreels, or newsreels were not as prominent back then. They were in their infancy. What there also wasn't was radio, right? I mean, just a few years later, these games would be broadcast nationally on the radio, and that certainly brought a lot of excitement. And it would be a way for fans to really tune in every New Year's Day and follow it. But in this case, there wasn't. There you could, like in Boston, go to the offices of the Boston Globe or the building and follow the game on a scoreboard outside the building, where they'd have it, get the play by play on wireless, by wire, and kind of show the progress of the ball. Not as satisfying a way as even 8 or 9 years later that people would have with the radio. So that was a big factor, I think. And you kind of had to wait till you got your newspaper the next day to find out what the score was.
Well, it's funny you say that. It was last year, the year before, we had a game. It was an NFL game, and my team was playing, and it was blacked out here. We didn't have it on here, and for some reason the radios weren't getting it, and my Sirius wasn't getting it. And I'm like, well, what the heck's going on here? So I had to sit there and watch the screen on CBS Sports or something, where they have the possession. The ball has a little field and the ball's moving around, and that was
right.
Probably one of the most painful experiences I've ever had to have of trying to enjoy a football game, because there's such a pause in between of the plays, where when you're watching a game, I don't think you really notice it, because you're enjoying seeing, subs coming in and out, and, coaches sending in plays and the huddles, and it's all part of it. But when you're just watching a blank screen, it had to probably be painful back then. It was probably even worse than what I was watching to see the game. But hey, they had to get the information somehow.
Well, of course, if there is only one way to do it, and that's to go to the Globe building, right, and see the scoreboard and the progress of the ball, and you're watching this and you're seeing it, what's happening, and everything that's happening, you're gasping, you're saying, whoa, first down. You'd think that there's nothing greater than that, right? Because there's no radio, no television, no nothing. You go, it's never going to get any better than this, right? This is the greatest thing ever, this scoreboard, right? And that's the way we are with all technology, right? So, because what you're referring to is the Gamecast, right? That the CBS Sports does, and all the others do. And sure enough, right, I sit there the same way you did, and I'll sit there and I'll go, boy, in the old days, this was the way people did it. And you're right, it seems like a crawl and a total waste of time. But the fact is, for them, this was the most exciting thing ever, right? So anyway, we digress.
Right. I guess the other element is the elements. I'm sure it probably wasn't a real warm day on New Year's Day up in Boston those times either. It's
well, but people were tough back then.
That's
right?
true. That's true.
And if you really wanted to watch it, you did it. I can as somebody who grew up there, I can tell you, you just did what you had to do in the winter. But yeah, it was that was it. That's the way you watched it. And of course, word of mouth, the word would get around. I suspect that it may also be that various Harvard clubs could do a wire, could do a phone thing, right, and have somebody call in with the phone bill being prohibitive back those days for most people, except for those rich guys in the Harvard club, right? So so there were all sorts of ways. But anyway, it was it was an exciting game, and the Harvardians were very the football fans of Harvard, of which there were many because Harvard was a football power back then. Were thrilled to do this, and it worked out well for them.
Okay, well, maybe you could tell us a little bit, maybe of the game flow and maybe some of the big events that happened during the contest.
Right. Well, the game flow was a slugfest of the kind that we rarely see nowadays. Both teams just ran the ball a lot, and in the second quarter, the Harvard brought in Freddie Church to try a field goal, and Harvard being relatively close to the Oregon goal line. And what Freddie did instead was he faked the field goal. This was a drop kick, and faked it and ran around the left end, 15 yards, and that was it. The game's only touchdown. He kicked the extra point. Harvard led 7-6. And that, my friend, was all the scoring. That concluded the scoring for the day. Oregon ran the ball 90 times, and smash mouth football. Orween broke his dislocated and broken arm, and stayed in the game. And all the players who were in the game were came out of it with black eyes and bruises. It was just a literally bruising game. And, when Oregon got down close a couple of times to try to take the lead in the second half, and Harvard blocked two of their field goals and forced another one wide. But when the game ended, the Crimson was a foot away from another touchdown that would have given them a 13-6 and maybe 14-6 lead. And if it was a 14-6 lead, that really would have been the game because there were no 2-point conversions in those days. So the game ended 7-6 for Harvard. And it was just a rough and tumble smash mouth game.
Well, now, did I hear you right? You said that Oregon ran the ball 90 times?
Yes.
But so they must have had Chip Kelly must have been coaching the Ducks way back then.
Yes.
That's a lot for running the ball because you got a running clock on that. It's not, I understand when you have passes mixed in, but that's quite some momentum. Right.
Chip was there. Chip was trying the trickeration, but Harvard was onto it. No, they this is per the accounts that I've read, that Oregon just pounded away. They pounded away. They thought they could really, have the Crimson track. In an account that my friend John Powers, another Harvardian, wrote, he wrote, "When the game ended, Harvard was a foot away from another touchdown. We misjudged you," Oregon captain Everett Brandenburg told the Crimson players at the hotel. "We did not believe that you would fight, but you certainly did." And again, that was I think the stereotype of the effete, rich Easterners coming out, and what they showed was, especially the guys who had been in the military, that this was a tough, hard-nosed squad, and they in those days they did what it took to win a 7-6 game.
At anytime you have a 1-point game, it had to be a good game, and I'm a lover of defense, so that probably would have been a great one to watch. So it's a shame that they didn't have video coverage of the game back then, because some of these games like that would probably be tremendous to go back and watch today.
There is one video that I saw, or a film on YouTube, of the Harvard-Princeton game of that year in 1919. And you get the flavor of it. I think when you watch the film, it's a little hard to follow it. I mean, I will admit that it's fun, but it's a little hard to follow it. And you see that it's a lot of running into the line, and it's a lot of trying to sweep the end, and What you don't see is guys in the pistol dropping back and flinging it, and the spread formation. That was yet to come, yet to come. But it's fun. It's fun to watch. I mean, especially because you kind of know what's going to happen, for some of us, let's face it, that's what we do. That's what we do. We love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the listeners can agree with us on that, because that's why they listen to podcasts like this and read books like you yourself write on preserving football history, because it's just such a great sport and there's so much variety to it, and such a great tradition and history involved with games like this that are just tremendous to enjoy.
The other thing I should mention that John Powers wrote about was the return that the Crimson got in Boston. He mentions that the squad returned to what he called a monster welcome in Boston. The players were given gold footballs, and Church was awarded his letter, which he had not received before this, because you have to play in the Yale game to get your letter. And then he said, John Powers says, and Harvard never has played another postseason game. So the 1920 team again went 8-0-1, blanked Yale at the bowl, and called it a season, as it has ever since. And that is true, Darren. I mean, can honestly tell you that I think Harvard will retire with a postseason record of 1-0-0. I think that will be it for the Crimson in the postseason, unless something changes radically, which I don't think it's going to. I don't think it's going to happen. They do not play. They're in the FCS, but they do not play postseason. The Ivies do not play in the postseason. So I think this is going to be. I think this is it. Get a 1,000% winning percentage in the postseason. That's it.
Now, why do you think that they continue that today? I'm sure they probably don't start classes like most universities till a little bit later in January, a week or two into January. Is it just tradition, or is it for some other reason?
It's back when the Ivy League was formalized in 1956. It was done to consciously get out of the big time football business. And as the years went on, of course, Ivy League football de-emphasized more and more, so that it ended up in the FCS rather than the FBS. And I once asked somebody who had been highly placed in the Ivy League hierarchy, and I said, what's the reason? I mean, why not, when you have a spectacular team, as they do many years? Why not give that team a chance to proceed in the FCS? And he looked at me and he said, because that's the line in the sand that the Ivy League draws to say that we're not in the football business. And that's it. You going in when you're recruited that there's not going to be postseason football, right? Nobody comes in thinking that things are going to change and you're going to have a chance to win the FCS national championship. Just not the way it works. Your final game is the Saturday before Thanksgiving. That's it. That's your last game of the season. So after that.
So it's probably more of an homage to academia over athletics at the college, and show the importance of, those are, pretty much known to be, especially Harvard, as being the top schools in the world for, academics to go to, and how hard it is to get into entry into the school of learning at Harvard and the Yales and the Columbias, as opposed to some of the other, fine universities we have around. So maybe that's sort of the angle they're taking.
On the other hand, as many people point out, especially rabid Ivy League football fans, of which there are still a few, they play in March Madness. They play in the hockey tournament. The Frozen Four. In fact, Yale won it a few years ago.
Right.
But that's this guy said to me, football. That's the line in the sand. That's to show that we are the Ivy League. That's what the Ivy League's about. And football being the signature sport, We are not in the big time or even the semi-big time football business, right? And if you want to be in that, you should go somewhere else, right? And so that's what it is. That's what it is. And it's, as I say, there have been some teams over the years that have been tremendous and would have certainly given a good account of themselves in the FCS championship. Princeton has a team this year that I think could do that. You know, they're 8-0 and they're 2 games from running the table, although they have their 2 tough games that they'll be playing. But let's say they finish 10-0. You'll start hearing people saying, wow, you know, what a shame that this team, you know, can't go on, can't go to the playoffs. But that's the deal, okay? And the coaches tell that to everybody when they're recruiting, and there's no fakery about it, right? It's just, that's what we are. We play 10 games every year, and we finish the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and that's it. That's it.
Wow, some very interesting insight on it. It's something I mean, I don't know if the listeners know, but I wasn't aware of that. I guess I never really thought about how you know, they, you know, didn't really pay attention that they weren't in the bowl games, I guess, till you mentioned it. So that's a very interesting stuff indeed, and great research on the game and the travels of this team from, you know, hundreds and some odd years ago too. So we really appreciate you coming on here, Dick, and you know, sharing this Rose Bowl memories with us this month, and helping us enjoy and preserve some more football history from that era.
Well, I'm delighted to do it, Darren, and I should also add that I have one personal memory of the Rose Bowl, and that is in 1974. I was out here in California, and at New Year's, and if I was out here in California, I was sure enough going to go to the Rose Bowl, and I went to the Rose Bowl. That year, Southern Cal played Ohio State, which they often seem to do in those days, and I walked around, and I don't know whether they still have the various benches with the scores of each game on them. But sure enough, I came to the 1920 game, Harvard 7, Oregon 6, and a guy was standing right next to me, and we started talking, and I said, well, yeah, and my team went to that game, and the guy looked at me and said, oh, you went to Oregon? And I said, oh, well, no, not quite. So yeah, a little bit of pride, and you know, for winning that game, and I guess the next game that I saw of an Ivy League team, and I don't know whether you're getting into this at all, is 1934, the famous upset of Columbia, whom you just spoke of Stanford, which is, you know, a total shocker and considered to be one of maybe the biggest upset in college football history. But I think that's the last time an Ivy League team appeared in the Rose Bowl, and maybe in any bowl at that point. So, and yeah, it's you know, that's all we have. You know, that's all of us wonks and nerds have. Just these few little moments of glory. That's it. That's it.
Well, hey, you know, not everybody, you know, my school's in Division II, so we never get to see much of anything. So, but you know, like the Alabamas and Ohio States of the world. But hey, you know, that's why there's you know, hundreds of different college football teams across the country, and everybody gets to get a little bit piece of the game and enjoy at whatever level they're playing, and enjoy their team and root for the players that are on there and have some great memories. So just like the ones that you shared with us today of this great Rose Bowl game. So, you know, Dick Friedman, thank you very much for joining us here in the Pig Pen once again and talking about some great football history.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.